Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on what time you're viewing this. I'm Rob Redden, and if this is the first time that you have viewed a video from me, I want to welcome you and express my gratitude and appreciation for your concern and your interest and the sacrifice of your time. I happen to be the minister for the Grover Beach Church of Christ on the beautiful Central Coast of California. I've been preaching almost a half a century, and I enjoy it as much as I did when I first started. And I enjoy coming to you through this avenue and giving you the opportunity to hear some things that might be helpful, encouraging you in your spiritual journey, and informing you the teachings of Jesus and the apostles, and some things from the Old Testament as well. Last week, we talked about taking the sting out of criticism. And I didn't complete that lesson because it was quite long, and so I'm going to continue it today. There are several verses that I introduced that sermon with, and I will do that again. This is about being criticized. Previous lesson, we talked about the way in which we should offer suggestions and advice and insights into another's choices, behavior, or beliefs. Proverbs 15:5, he who regards reproof is prudent. So we see that if a person has an open mind to listen to the criticism given him or her, it may lead to wisdom. In verse 10 of chapter 15, he who hates reproof will die. And we have seen that in many instances throughout the years, that if somebody will not take advice concerning their behavior, it could lead to their serious injury or untimely death. In verse 31 of the same chapter, he whose ears listens to the life-giving reproof will dwell among the wise. In other words, if we're open to correction, we'll be wiser than we were the day before. In verse 32, he who neglects discipline or criticism despises himself, but he who listens to reproof acquires understanding. If we have an open mind and a willingness to try to improve our lives, and somebody cares enough to give us insights into something that is hindering us from reaching that spiritual goal that Jesus has for us. Now, if we neglect that, we certainly will not acquire understanding. But if we do, the understanding that we'll gain about ourselves and how we can improve our lives. Proverbs 9:8, reprove a wise man, and he will love you. But a fool, obviously, will hate you. The very idea that you think you can correct me, or you serious? You think that you can give me advice? That's a fool talking. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Then Proverbs 25:12, like an earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold is a wise reprover to a listening ear. Last week we looked at a few biblically based suggestions on how to manage criticism. We first considered its value. We cannot see ourselves as others see us. It's impossible. They may look at us negatively. We may have a clash in personalities, or our idiosyncrasies may bring us criticism, or our values may be bothersome to others because we may come across to them as self-righteous. Now, that may be their judgment, of course, but it may be an unfair one at that. Our differences in dress, hygiene, styles, tattoos, piercings, our taste in foods, and the more and more may lead to criticisms. We need to know how to handle criticism, be it unfair or fair. And talking about this, it may be fair criticisms for those who care. They care enough about us to put their friendship at risk and tell us some things that we need to hear. We may not be living up to the values we claim to embrace. Perhaps we dress suggestively or alluring with more flesh showing than we should. And men, this is also applicable to us. Or it may be in our language, the choice of words that we use. Maybe we're not even aware of the language that is improper for a child of God. Maybe we will tell off-color jokes that point to a spiritual weakness and immaturity. Or we may espouse a concept that is worldly rather than biblical. Perhaps we have embraced some standards of the world, such as abortion is okay, the gay lifestyle is okay, and transgenderism is okay, or even racism, or legalizing undocumented immigrants. Or perhaps there are doctrinal issues that border on heresy due to ignorance or listening to the wrong teachers. Perhaps it's bad stewardship, a lack of control on our spending while we rob God of our offerings. Perhaps we have bad habits that are not only harmful to our bodies, but also harmful to our example and influence with others, such as tobacco, drugs, alcohol, or gluttony. We can certainly learn from any criticism, be it fair or unfair, be it loving or mean-spirited. But it takes a mature spiritual person to handle criticism at all. And it takes an even more spiritual person to manage negative criticism that may be unwarranted. And we'll touch on this later. But you know, Jesus the Lord, God the Father, the Holy Spirit teach us to manage criticism in a Christ-like spirit. And I was going to cover this last week. I may have touched on it, but let us look at it again. When we are criticized, we should speak only when necessary. Our knee-jerk response usually isn't the best response we can give. Or we could simply say, you know, I have to think about that and I'll get back with you on it, and maybe we can talk about it. You think about Jesus, and he was accused of being a heretic, making false claims about God being his Father, and that he could rebuild the temple in 3 days, and that he had the power to forgive sins, and that he was the Messiah. And they accused him of blasphemy. The only thing they got right was that he did claim to be the Messiah. But how did he manage all those other things? He didn't defend himself. He could have. Oh, yes, he could have. He could have appealed to his miracles. He could have called forth witnesses, and he could have refuted each accusation, but he didn't. What did he do? He was silent. Before Pilate, Matthew 27:12, and while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" And he did not answer him with regard to even a single charge. So the governor was quite amazed. Don't you think that if a criticism is given to you before others and you remain silent, that they would be quite amazed as well? And under their breath, they may be saying, "Give it to him. Blow him out of the water. How dare he criticize you?" Well, making things worse, exacerbating the situation is not good. Now, going back to their challenge of his claim to be a Messiah, the only response was when the high priest asked him about that. He quoted Daniel 7:13, Jesus did. And he said, "I am." In other words, I agree. I am the Messiah. "And you shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." Mark 14:62. Quoting that passage was a direct claim to be the Messiah. And this was enough for them to claim that he was guilty of blasphemy, and they took a vote to condemn him. Why did they condemn him to die for claiming to be the Messiah? There were a lot of people during that period of time that claimed to be the Messiah that weren't condemned by the court of the Jews. But it was Jesus, because they expected a warrior, and they saw nothing like that in this Prince of Peace. Furthermore, we need to consider the source to determine how we are to respond to criticism. In Proverbs 26:24 and 25, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you will also be like him." Verse 5, "Answer a fool as his folly deserves, that he not be wise in his own eyes." Now, this seems to be a paradox. Some say a contradiction, but it isn't. The difference is important to notice. And Barnes, a renowned commentator in the 19th century, explains two sides of a truth. To answer a fool according to his folly is to bandy words, which means a war of words. To descend to his level of coarse anger and vile abuse. In verse 5, it is to say the right word at the right time to expose his unwisdom and untruth, not by teaching beyond his reach, but by words that he is just able to apprehend. You know, people are often offended when we point out the lack of logic in their remarks. And I have dealt with defense mechanisms called logical fallacies in the past. And we're all guilty of that form of self-defense, aren't we? We want to protect our fragile egos. I think the best way to do that with someone is to give a story, an illustration. You know, just because, for example, you ate at a restaurant one time and got a bad meal doesn't mean you'll get another bad meal if you visit a second time. In response to somebody, "I'll never eat there again. I went there one time and got a bad meal." Well, have you ever considered the fact that perhaps the cook was out sick, and they had a substitute that wasn't as trained. Or perhaps the delivery person failed to bring their produce and meat that day, and he had to do the best with what he had. So when we stereotype someone because of his tattoos or her piercings, we are doing the same thing, right? Come on, give him a break. Give her a break. Or you can apply it to yourself based upon the criticism that you were given. Regardless of the source, we have no choice as a child of God. We must possess self-control, restraint, and maintain a loving spirit. Do all things in love. Not easy, but the Lord didn't say it would be easy. But nothing worthwhile is easy. And remember, if we value the criticism of a friend, we'll be wiser and more knowledgeable than when we were before. So it's especially important that we control our emotions. Another thing, ask yourself if others have made similar criticisms. Is there a pattern here? Have I heard that from others? If so, are they all wrong? Is it just coincidence? Or is there truth to that criticism? I think I would just do some soul searching if I see a pattern and have received similar criticisms from others. And I should see that as an expression of love and concern rather than just people enjoy doing it. And so we need to assume the obvious rather than looking for excuses. Do I fail to keep my promises? Have several called my attention to this. We need to take a hint. No, furthermore, we need to be willing to agree with the criticism. We're not perfect, and we say and do things, or fail to say or do things that may be appropriate or inappropriate. But we need to accept the truth, whatever the source. And again, I would say, this takes some spiritual growth and maturity. Even if it is mean-spirited, we can deal with that later. We can deal with the delivery, but we need to deal with the message. Just allow any truth to better us as a person and to help improve our abilities and value our company of the church and of our family. Now, if it is mean-spirited, you may just say, excuse me, I'm not above criticism. I'm not perfect. But if we expect to accomplish something good with one another, we must change the way we're speaking with each other. I'm not being overly sensitive. I'm only expecting the same respect as you would if the situation was reversed. And if they change their tone, turn it back to them and ask them how they would have handled the situation, showing you're willing to learn if they are willing to teach instead of criticizing. Move into a problem-solving mode, which shows that you are planning to benefit from the constructive criticism. Let's work together to find a solution to this issue. Do you have any suggestions for me? And so another thing, so often we're so sensitive, we're so fragile, that we take everything said too seriously. Do we really expect to be perfect and we want other people to think that we are perfect? There's only one human being that has ever lived a perfect life, and he was criticized every day of his public ministry, even by his own disciples. So let's ask ourselves, what difference will this make a year from now? Play the worst scenario. If we can live with the worst case, forget it. Try to weed out the weeds and take the seed and the true plant and implant it in our hearts. You know, I have learned to laugh at myself, and that has helped me to admit to myself my imperfections. And I certainly have laughed at my own stupidity. We all make stupid mistakes. Just watch those silly, amazing videos on TV. And so don't let negative thinking destroy us. Jesus loves us and believes in us. He was willing to die for us. We do plan to grow and mature as human beings, don't we? As God's children? I know I do. God isn't finished with me yet. And so I am going to get some criticism to help God work on my flaws. Let's not kill the messenger. Well, what if we blow it? We often do. Are we so thin-skinned not to recognize it? You know, in other words, the criticism sets us off because we feel it is unfair or untrue and feel personally attacked. But I must ask myself, is there the slightest truth in that criticism? Am I overreacting because I know it's the truth, but I don't want to talk about the elephant in the living room? Jesus was harsh with the self-righteous Pharisees, but he was God in the flesh, and his perception of their flaws were perfect. No one's criticism is perfect. Let's just put that on the table and accept it. It won't always come to us wrapped with a bow, but there may be some vinegar with it. But you know, we must be willing to accept it. The Pharisees, they could dish it out, but they couldn't accept it. They criticized others who weren't as righteous as they were. Of course, righteous in their own eyes. We're not willing to take criticism. And once again, if it's harsh, you may say, you know, I appreciate your concern, but I think you can work on your delivery a little bit. Why are you being so harsh in your tone? If you're concerned with me, wouldn't you try to communicate this in a kind, loving spirit? Now, I will accept your criticism if I examine it and discover that it's true. But it's very hard to do when somebody comes on so strong as you have, brother. In other words, you're kind and you're dealing with the harshness of a critic. That's not always going to happen, because sometimes when we get our feelings hurt, we have a knee-jerk response and we respond in kind. And that's more often than not. And it's sad. And that's the value of these lessons. Make us think. Think before we speak. How, as a Christian, should I respond? And that is vital, my friends. You know, in 2 Timothy 4:2, we find preaching is part exhortation, that is encouragement, partly reproving, and partly rebuking. That's 2/3 correcting people. You know, but obviously it's got to be in love, speaking the truth in love, Ephesians 4. He says, preach the word, be ready in season and out of season. That tells me when you want to do it or when you don't want to do it. Be ready always, regardless of circumstances, to preach the word, reprove, rebuke, exhort with great patience and instruction. Well, thank you for listening. I want to invite you to the Church of Christ. If you're in our area, it's at 202 South 8th Street, Grover Beach, California, 1 block south of the main street called Grand Avenue. So it's at 8th and Rockaway. We meet for worship at 11 o'clock. If you can come and meet us for Bible study at 10, we're studying the exciting book of Exodus in the Old Testament. If you're not in our area, look up a Church of Christ in your area. I'm sure you can find the time when they meet, and I assure you there will be a warm welcome of you and your family when you arrive. They will not embarrass you. They will not put pressure on you. They'll treat you as a visitor. They will not put pressure on you to put money in the collection basket or plate. We always tell our visitors, we do not feel that you are obligated to give. It's this church family's obligation to take care of its financial affairs. But we appreciate you coming our way, and you're an honored guest. I want to thank you once again for giving me your time. And it is my prayer that God will keep you and bless you until we meet again. Goodbye.